Once upon a time, an octopus named Nina spent her days entirely alone, perfectly content. But one ominous Monday, a shark emerges offering friendship at a terrifying price, a single arm. Nina agrees. Piece by piece, she surrenders her own flesh until literally nothing is left. Once devoured, the shark feels a sudden, hollow ache of loneliness, misses its former victim, and swims off to hunt for a fresh plaything. Grim aquatic fairy tale is spun by Jaden, troubled teen locked away inside short-term 12. Beneath the childish metaphor of sea creatures hides a sickening real confession, child having her safety slowly, deliberately ripped away by the very person sworn to protect her. Released in 2013 and directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, the film drops us straight into a California short-term foster facility for troubled youth, born directly from Cretton's own 2 years working in a similar center. Every raw, jagged edge of this place bleeds pure authenticity. What makes this facility so chilling isn't just the kids, it's the gatekeepers standing on the other side of the locked doors. Every single day, these counselors try to pull lost kids back from the brink, entirely blind to the fact that they are drowning in their own private darkness. Healing is never a straight line, and sometimes the savior needs saving just as desperately as the monster they protect. The nightmare begins on a seemingly ordinary shift through the eyes of Nate, fresh-faced rookie stepping into the fire on day one. Mason, a seasoned counselor, casually cracks jokes about his own baptism by fire, lulling everyone into a false sense of security. Then the alarm screeches, shattering the quiet. Sammy, a fragile resident, bursts through the doors, bolting toward the gates like his life depends on it. Staff members sprint after him, tackling him to the grass as he screams and thrashes in blind panic.
How you guys doing over there?
Welcome to Short-Term 12. Chaos constantly simmers just beneath a fragile facade of calm. This temporary holding cell scoops up kids chewed up by abuse, abandonment, and fractured homes, holding them briefly before spitting them back out into foster care, broken families, or the terrifying void of adulthood. Every single kid here carries a walking trauma. Some survived bone-breaking domestic violence. Others suffered unspeakable abuse behind locked bedroom doors. All of them lost their childhood innocence far too early, bound together by the same mutilated past. Take Marcus. He is just days away from his 18th birthday, the day the state legally throws him to the wolves. As the clock ticks down, he spirals into a volatile, hair-trigger rage. He refuses to leave, clinging desperately to one bizarre wish for his birthday, to shave his head completely bald. Then comes Jaden, a razor-sharp newcomer. She struts in from a wealthy, polished family background that screams upper-class respectability. Beneath her icy, rebellious exterior and biting sarcasm lies a defensive wall built out of pure barbed wire. Whenever she slips, she retreats to a sketchbook, drawing frantically, non-stop, as if sketching her own fractured mind onto paper. Even Sammy, the fragile boy clutching his toys like living sisters, bears scars all his own. The facility strips away any illusion that psychological trauma respects wealth, race, or social standing. It can surface in an impoverished family, inside a home overflowing with material wealth, or anywhere love is distorted or missing. Standing guard over these broken souls are the counselors. At the center stands Grace, an iron-willed supervisor radiating fierce empathy. She runs group therapy, sweeps rooms, and holds the absolute trust of both her peers and the kids. Yet, while she effortlessly patches everyone else's bleeding wounds, her own internal world remains a ticking bomb. Bound to fellow counselor Mason in a long-term relationship, she locks her heart behind a fortress, terrified to let him all the way in. Beside her stands Mason, radiating a steady, disarming warmth. Having survived the foster care meat grinder himself, he knows the suffocating terror haunting these halls. He weaponizes humor and bottomless patience, cracking just the right jokes to diffuse volatile explosions before they ignite. While Grace pulls inward, armor tightening, Mason flings his doors wide open, serving as the invisible glue holding this crumbling asylum together. Then enters Nate, the wide-eyed rookie chasing life experience in a savior complex. His intentions are pure, but his very presence exposes the agonizing gulf between the helper and the broken. Through Nate's eyes, the brutal truth sets in. Short-Term 12 isn't about saving anyone. These kids reject pity and condescending stares. They just want to be treated like human beings. To survive this trench warfare, the staff must learn to swallow a bitter pill. They're not parents. Their job isn't to replace shattered families, but to build a fortified perimeter of safety so these kids can breathe, cross that sacred boundary, lose that clinical detachment, and disaster strikes. Once a resident steps past those front gates, where they're scooped up by family or vanishing into the night, the staff lose all jurisdiction. That realization dictates every calculated move. Before earning trust, a counselor must play the fool. They shoot hoops, swallow pride, dive into ridiculous pranks, and crawl into the kids' broken worlds instead of dragging them into a foreign one. That delicate balance defines what makes short-term 12 so haunting. This place is nothing more than a temporary pit stop for walking wreckage, trying to piece life back together. But the cruel twist is that the gatekeepers holding them up are bleeding out from wounds just as deep. It forces a terrifying question into the light. What happens when the broken try to fix the broken? Trauma refuses to die when the event ends. It festers, bleeding silently through the years, infecting how a person loves, builds relationships, and stares into the mirror. The past refuses to stay buried, poisoning the present with invisible terrors and sabotaging every fragile bond. Everything shatters completely the moment Grace discovers she is pregnant. A life that should spark joy instead rips open a buried panic. Despising her own broken reflection, she doubts her right to mother anyone while her inner child still bleeds. She quietly schedules an abortion behind closed doors, her internal fracture bleeding outward and violently alienating Mason, the one man who offers her unconditional grace. Right as internal chaos threatens to swallow her whole, Jaden steps into her orbit as a distorted mirror image. Gripping her sketchpad like a shield, the razor-tongued girl hides a horrific reality, a victim of brutal abuse at the hands of her own flesh and blood. Through the fable of the octopus feeding her body to the shark, the horrific truth emerges. Nina represents the helpless child. The shark is the monstrous father. It approaches under the guise of friendship, slowly stripping away pieces until nothing remains, mirroring how domestic predators weaponize authority and love to devour a child piece by piece. And if Nina is Jaden, Grace was once Nina herself. Beneath that ironclad armor lies a childhood soaked in neglect. Growing up with a mother, cycling through endless boyfriends, young Grace would draw endless portraits of the men, intentionally stalling for precious minutes to keep them away from her mother. After her mother dies, she lands directly in her father's house, becoming the prisoner of relentless, sickening abuse. The trauma reaches a boiling point when she finally breaks the silence, dragging her father into a prison cell. Even years later, those phantom memories dictate her every breath, warping her view of love and turning the mere thought of motherhood into a waking nightmare. Despite the generational gap, an unbreakable, invisible cord snaps taut between the two damaged souls. Jaden, who trusts absolutely no one, drops her defenses for Grace, finding a rare harbor in a woman who truly understands the language of pain. Meanwhile, as Grace and Jaden grapple with their inner demons, the other kids in the facility wage their own silent wars against the ghosts of their pasts. When Marcus steps up to spit a raw, self-written rap, the horrific pieces of his childhood finally snap into focus. He paints a grim picture of a drug-addicted, abusive mother, forcing a child to swallow nightmares far too early. Staring down the barrel of adulthood at 18, Marcus stands completely naked before the world. No family, no anchor, and no clue where tomorrow leads. His obsession with shaving his head isn't just a quirky whim. It is a desperate physical check to see if the brutal scars carved into his scalp by his mother's fists are still fading away. When all these ticking time bombs converge, the facility violently detonates. Fresh off a choked, tearful acceptance of Mason's marriage proposal, Grace takes a devastating double punch. A chilling phone call announces her monster of a father is about to be released from prison, alongside the sickening news that Jaden is scheduled to be shoved straight back into her father's home, paired with the sudden tragic death of his pet fish, his only true confidant in the dorm. Marcus finally snaps. The last thread of his sanity shreds, driving him toward a catastrophic, self-destructive meltdown. Everything slides off the rails at once. Rejecting Mason's steady anchor, quietly locking in the abortion and shoving her fiancé away into the dark, Grace severs every single lifeline, Terrified of bleeding out again, she chooses preemptive destruction. In the dead of night, she grips a baseball bat, slipping into Jaden's father's driveway with murder on her mind, ready to cave the sleeping monster's skull in. Before she crosses that point of no return, Jaden emerges from the shadows, stopping her dead in her tracks. Pulling back from the abyss, Grace realizes her own trauma is threatening to swallow Jaden whole rather than save her. Instead of spilling blood, the two shattered souls unleash decades of bottled-up rage onto the monster's car. The sound of shattering glass ripping through the night air serves as an agonizing, cathartic release. In that furious moment, Grace sheds her adult skin, morphing right back into the helpless little girl robbed of a voice, finally striking back against her tormentor. Wrecked but breathing, pair return to the center, where Jaden finally summons the courage to expose her father's crimes. Back home, Grace breaks down, confessing and begging Mason for forgiveness. The man simply opens his arms, wrapping her in his unconditional, unbreakable safety net. The concrete block crushing her chest vanishes completely when he casually drops the best news of all. Marcus survived his suicide attempt and is going to pull through. The rhythm of the nightmare finally slows, bleeding into a softer, healing dawn. Weeks later, Grace sits across from a therapist, finally dragging her buried skeletons out into the light. Hand in hand with Mason, she stares at the blurry ultrasound of their unborn child. Out on the familiar porch, Mason smiles, casually recounting running into Marcus out in the real world. The once feral, angry teen now walking tall, holding down a normal life and a girlfriend. Reaching this fragile peace demanded an agonizing war of attrition. Inside a pressure cooker like short-term 12, casual conversation acts as a literal landmine, instantly triggering explosive panic attacks. For trauma survivors, stitching a coherent narrative together out of pure shrapnel is an impossible task. When words fail and shatter against the weight of agony, art steps in as the ultimate survival language. That is why art has long served as a vital therapeutic weapon. For Marcus, music cuts deeper and rings truer than any forced counseling session, letting him bleed his rage and terror straight into his verses. Jaden uses ink and paper to map out the monstrous tragedy her tongue refuses to speak, weaponizing a fairy tale to scream the brutal truth about her father. Inside this unspoken language, seeds of empathy finally take root. Beneath Marcus's feral, volatile armor beats a fiercely sensitive heart. When Jaden collapses on her birthday, abandoned once again by her father, Marcus quietly pulls out a craft box, rallying the other kids to stitch together a handmade sympathy card. These shattered ghosts, trapped in a transit station, learn to lean on one another, using quiet shared suffering to stitch their broken pieces back together. Short-term 12 refuses a Hollywood fairy tale ending. When the mandatory residency clock runs out, the kids still sling their bags over their shoulders and march right back out those heavy front gates. Their tomorrows remain terrifyingly uncertain, dangling over an abyss of risk. The version of them walking out carries a spine made of steel compared to the broken wrecks who first arrived. The scars carved into Marcus, Jaden and Grace may bleed silently forever. But the vicious generational chain of abuse finally snaps, shattered by raw understanding. Healing isn't some magical finish line where all pain magically vanishes. It is a brutal, inch-by-inch daily war where every tiny step forward counts. A bleeding soul can still offer sanctuary because they alone know the exact taste of agony. Throughout this purgatory, Mason catches Grace. Grace catches Jaden, and Jaden pulls Grace back from the edge. Even the kids salvage one another in the dark, but empathy remains useless without the terrifying courage to stare your own demons dead in the eye. Because running from the past guarantees you will only recreate it. And perhaps that is the ultimate haunting truth the film leaves behind. The broken do not heal each other by playing flawless heroes. They heal each other simply by carving out a safe space to bleed together, ensuring no one ever has to face the dark alone.